Hello guys, welcome to the Phantom X2 Pro review. This review is also available on techish.com as an article which you can read if you prefer that. Normally, a successful company will introduce a sub-brand that focuses on the mass market with better pricing. This is done so as to beat competition, bring users to the company's ecosystem, tighten their control of market share, and also to ensure that the company's competition remains itself. This is something we've seen with many smartphone companies. It's something we see with different tech makers and even telcos. It can be done in an obvious manner, or it can be done in a way that the general public may never know. Over time, these sub-brands can grow and even become the main business of the company, or later on become solo companies. What we aren't used to is this: a company that started off as a mass market budget producer, venturing into a high market segment that's seen to be a preserve of others. And that's exactly what Tecno is doing. There are inherent risks with such a move. Going flagship isn't an easy task, and you risk alienating your current group of users like OnePlus did, or completely losing out in cash while building a product people may never buy. In this review, we'll be judging the new X2 Pro as Tecno's second attempt to dive into the flagship category with their Phantom sub-brand. Let's get honest. The first thing I want to focus on is the flagship claim. Reactions to the device have been diverse. Some people have said, no, that's not a flagship phone, while others have been like, Tecno can't really be asking 83k for a phone. There are also positive reactions, especially to the marketing campaign Tecno has undertaken. And quite funnily too, I've experienced some positive reactions to that camera design. So, is this a flagship phone? Let's look at the specs. What makes a phone to be considered flagship? It's the hardware and the crazy numbers. We can all agree on that, and Tecno is packing quite the punch here. Let's see. First, the MediaTek Dimensity 9000 is built on a 4nm process. It benchmarks just as good as the Snapdragon 8 Gen 1, if not better in some instances. Yes, it doesn't have the best GPU, but it really still is a flagship chipset. There's no doubt that it will handle tasks well and that it will be very efficient with battery consumption. Yes, we're already seeing Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 phones, but Tecno's device isn't competing directly with those. It's meant to undercut them. Secondly, the phone comes with 12 gigs of RAM and 256 gigs of storage. Huge numbers, and rightly so for the flagship moniker. And these are the same numbers most flagships are currently shipping with. And it's not just the numbers, it's also the type of RAM and storage used. Tecno is using UFS 3.1 storage, which is very fast, at par with most flagships in the past year. Yes, some devices have already launched with UFS 4.0, which is way faster, but that's still a reserve for a couple of devices right now. So you're still getting very high-end storage. And that's the same case with RAM. The Dimensity 9000 uses LPDDR5X RAM. That's the same tech that's packed on high-end flagships launching right now. In my period of use, the phone is that good in performance and that good in battery life. And by that, I mean just as you'd expect for the numbers it packs. However, flagship doesn't end with just RAM, storage and processor. Let's look at more hardware. The design, I would say, is very weird, and it's up to somebody's personal taste to decide whether or not it looks good to them. As early as last year when the phone design leaked, I found it weird, and I still do. However, it is slowly growing in on me, especially with the way people are weirdly reacting when I show off the phone and to the response that I've gotten from the huge cameras. I think there's a correlation between huge cameras on phones and people instantly believing that means very good cameras. If that's what Tecno is going for, then they've hit the nail on the head with the general public's reaction to this device. Where they've cut corners on is with the display. Not saying that this isn't an excellent display to use though. However, there's an omission that would have made it a way better deal. The curved display in true fashion of flagships uses an AMOLED panel capable of 120Hz refresh rates. It is protected using Corning Gorilla Glass Victors, which isn't something you find on many devices in this price range. However, the omission is on how bright the panel can get, which in turn affects HDR certification, meaning there's no HDR certification with this phone. From my use, I'm guessing the X2 Pro actually gets a lot more brighter than the listed 500 nits of brightness. Perhaps there's something Tecno did not disclose, because even side by side with the Galaxy S22, which Tecno really wants you to compare this phone with, you will see that when you put them on full brightness, to the normal eye, they appear to be quite similar. So they definitely cut corners here. But how did they handle the battery? A few years ago, it was cheap phones that owned the battery segment. Flagships were particularly poor with battery, as companies raced for performance and thinness while using chips that weren't so efficient. That's no longer the case, and right now it's the flagships that dominate battery tests. The 5160 mAh battery fast charges at 45 watt speeds. Tecno claims that the phone charges from 0 to 54% in 20 minutes and to 100% in 1 hour. In my experience with it, these numbers are sometimes achieved, though with slight variations. So from 0 to 100 will sometimes take something like 65 minutes to 68 to 70 minutes. The thing that I've liked is that you get close to 2 days of normal use thanks to how efficient the chipset is. So in comparison to what other flagships offer, you're getting a similar if not better experience in battery and fast charging. This is especially because many flagships are still shying away from ridiculous fast charging speeds. After looking at the design, the specs, the battery and the display, one still needs to properly see the cameras to see if this is really flagship territory. So let's discuss that. This is what differentiates the Phantom X2 and the Phantom X2 Pro. Everything else remains the same. The X2 is 68K while the X2 Pro is 83K, meaning Tecno must have really put in the effort worth asking 15K more for. I don't have the cheaper X2 to be able to exactly tell you what the differences are in cameras, but I've gone out and taken photos with the X2 Pro, and I can say it's a very solid improvement from the previous Phantom X cameras. The main 50 megapixel camera is good in color and dynamic range. The 2.5x zoom camera, on the other hand, suffers a little with color, where it tends to oversaturate an image in certain instances. That's not the case always though. Meanwhile, the ultra-wide 13 megapixel lens feels off in color, but still impresses in just how wide it can get. A few things to say about Tecno's new camera software. First, night tracking is great. Works even on pets, allowing you to ensure the subject is always in focus, and it's fast and easy to use because it just works. Secondly, the interface is now more intuitive and easy to use, so you'll find your way around the camera easier. Thirdly, the AI now better recognizes different scenes, knowing the difference between landscapes and grass, plants and flowers, etc. What I don't like is how the cameras default to certain beauty filters that are just plain weird, even the selfie camera. I understand some people may love these features, but not everyone does. I wish Tecno would make them optional when setting up the camera so that someone chooses to set them on if they need to, and not finding them always on so that they need to find a way to turn them off. The video quality, I'll say, is great. What Tecno needs to work on is on stability. They've done a good job with the color and clarity, especially with the main camera and the 2.5x lens, but the footage is still very shaky when walking. To get good footage from this phone, set up a tripod and get good lighting. Provided you're in a quiet environment, you'll also be able to get good audio. Now, what are other things that make a phone flagship? And does the Phantom X2 Pro have them? Let's see. First thing is an official IP rating for dust and water resistance, which is very absent from the X2 Pro. It will be such a good inclusion at this price point, but I think it costs millions of dollars to get the certification, so it's probably one of the corners Tecno decided to cut on. Also, it isn't a bad thing in particular, given a good number of devices in this category and in this price range. Take the Xiaomi 12 Pro for example, which is a little more expensive, also don't have official IP ratings. Second thing is this, dual speakers. The Phantom X2 Pro has only a single speaker at the bottom. It gets plenty loud and clear, but I don't think I can call it good. If for some YouTube videos and podcasts, then yes, it's serviceable. But if for music and gaming, then you're better off with some headphones. Third thing is the headphone jack, and yes, in true flagship fashion, there's none. Fourth thing is 5G, which the phone supports. Fifth thing is pricing, and herein lies a bone of contention. The two new Phantom X2s, a Pro and a base model, with the difference, as you've already seen, being in the cameras. However, the X2 Pro is 83K while the X2 is 68K. That's a 15K gap. And is that flagship pricing? Not really. Especially if you look at devices from Apple and Samsung and their pricings. But if you look at devices from, say, Xiaomi and the Google Pixels, you'll see that the new Tecno X2 Pro is within their territory. And people have kept asking me, why should you spend 80k on a Tecno phone and not a Pixel or a Xiaomi phone? For 68k, I think getting 8 gigs of RAM, 256 gigs of storage in that quality and the Dimensity 9000 chipset feels okay, kind of. 83k, however, feels cheap, even with the positive strides Tecno has taken, including the assurance of software updates up to Android 15. The only thing failing Tecno right now for me is in the software experience, and I wish they listened and focused a little bit more on that. Make the software cleaner, easy on the eye, more intuitive, less distractive, beautiful, and you have yourselves a winner device. Honestly, if you could say run Samsung UI on this device and optimize the computational photography aspects of the phone to take advantage of the camera hardware, just like Google does with the Pixels, I think this phone would be such a good thing to get. That's however not fully the case, which means I will still argue for this phone, the X2 Pro at 83k, to be priced a little cheaper. However, looking at the business side of things, it makes a lot of sense for Tecno to have 83k as their asking price. First of all, Tecno has been operating on a high volume of sales, small margins of profit for a very long time. Getting into the flagship territory means new design processes, new factories, and a lot of research, meaning new teams. That probably means the new devices don't have huge profit margins as we'd expect from, say, Apple or Samsung. They're also not making very many of such devices in a year, which normally will translate to better profits thanks to a streamlined manufacturing process paying off when many devices are sold. Which means we may only see more features being added, say IP68 rating, which costs millions of dollars certification, once the company is able to churn out many of such devices and sell them in good numbers. Secondly, I believe Tecno knows this, and they've embraced that standing because they're only making these devices as a way of shifting brand perception, which is a huge undertaking that usually takes time. With such devices, the company is talked of and seen of in a new light in the eyes of current customers, potential ones, and even reviewers. With such devices, the company finds its name appearing in lists when people talk of other bigger, well-known manufacturers. Tecno knows it, and they've been using that slow ascent to be able to be taken as a serious player in the smartphone industry, while prepping for something that will take the market, say, by storm in the coming months. They're soon launching their first foldable, and that will bring even more hype to them. Thirdly, the X2 Pro is meant to draw people's attention to the X2, which is cheaper. I'm glad Tecno used the suggestion from the Phantom X2 review to bring in a similar device with less RAM but better pricing, while offering almost the same sort of experience. With the specs, the pricing, and the assurance of updates up to Android 15, Tecno is moving in the right direction. They brought forth something worth talking about, something worth carrying around, and something that shifts brand perception and becomes an option for people who would normally fork out money for other brands. They just need to work on the software experience. What do you think? And with this long review, do you think you'll get yourself a Phantom? Thank you very much for watching. Subscribe.